My good friend, you sound like I'm going to sell snake oil or something. George Belair, he's KB0ZCT.
Silent key.
Yes.
No, that's you.
Some people never.
He was listed as a silent key.
I was.
Yes, he was. Because of an error on some idiot's part. Nonetheless, quite obviously, he is alive and kicking. And he's also the owner of not one, but two, count them, two DMR repeaters. He knows more about DMR.
What do you want?
Oh boy, he's on the phone again.
I ignore him.
Okay. He knows more about DMR than anybody else in this room. I hope. Without further ado, my friend George.
Don't kneel. Don't kneel. Okay, bye.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here this evening. The presentation that I'm going to give you was first developed quite a few years ago for our DMR exhibit booth at Dayton, Ohio during the ham convention. It's been modified a little bit since then. Some of the slides were produced by Motorola. They show some of the basics of the DMR technology. I'm not going to get into real technical stuff. I want to try and keep it as simple as I can for you. I've been involved with DMR, probably 6, close to 7 years. I have 2 repeaters, each on different networks. So it has a greater offering in the Omaha area for talking around the world. The DMR repeaters are digital. It's a standard that was developed in Europe. It's an open standard, and as such, a lot of other vendors have come in to the marketplace selling inexpensive DMR radios. It's unlike most of the other digital technology you may be aware of, like D-Star and Yaesu System Fusion, in that the DMR repeaters can have 2 simultaneous conversations at the same time, obviously simultaneous, without interfering with each other. And now I'll show you how that's possible in my presentation. Can everybody see the TV? Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have the 15-pin VGA adapter to use a better slide projector. I have to use the TV. Now, the DMR is an acronym for Digital Mobile Radio. MARC is an acronym for the Motorola Amateur Radio Club. We are the Motorola Amateur Radio Club worldwide network in 48 countries. It is the fastest growing digital communications network in the world. And I don't have a lot of stats on that. I do have some in my presentation. This presentation was originated by Mike in Schaumburg, Illinois. His call sign is A89VI. He's a Motorola service engineer. He knows more about DMR than probably anybody I know. I have since altered this a little bit to bring it up to date with some of the information. It's an ESTI standard. That's European Standard for Telecommunications Interface, if I remember it correctly. There's probably over a dozen different DMR radio manufacturers, unlike System Fusion, where you only have one manufacturer. That's Yaesu, D-Star, you have ICOM. It has superior voice quality. It's almost like talking around the world as if you were talking to somebody in this room. It's that clear of a digital audio. Motorola's done some testing, and they say the battery life is extended in the digital mode over when it's operated in analog. And we can have multiple talk groups, which I'll be getting into. Basically, we have 2 repeaters in one. And it's the only system where you can have simultaneous conversations on each of the talk groups, or time slots. DMR is what they call TDMA. It's time division multiple access. And it switches between time slot 1 and time slot 2 so fast that you don't even know what's happening through the miracle of modern technology. As an example, with the repeater, you have time slot 1, time slot 2, and it alternates back and forth on the same frequency. That's how you get the 2 simultaneous conversations. We take up half of the channel bandwidth using this technology. Of course, you're familiar with the 25 kilohertz analog bandwidth. Digital is 25 kilohertz. That's for D-Star, System Fusion, and the rest of them. But in DMR, we take this 12 and a half, split it again. So that the actual bandwidth for time slot 1 and time slot 2 is 6.25 kilohertz each. Whereas with a regular one, you have a gap between when they separate it. With DMR, there is no gap. If you have a question while I'm going through these, please raise your hand. Better signal quality. Sometimes with digital and occasionally even with DMR, you're going to get that R2D2 sound effect. As people leave the repeater coverage area, it starts to do. D-Star is probably the worst of any of the 3 digital standards used by ham radio operators. System Fusion and DMR use forward error correcting. You're probably familiar with that with your networking and stuff like that at home and work. Forward error connecting is much more reliable and feasible than the other types of error correcting. Have redundancy checks to make sure the signal goes through. Now this is a slide produced by Motorola showing that you get longer battery life when you're in the digital mode over an analog mode or even some other digital modes. It's about a 40% increase in the length of the battery. And I've noticed that by carrying my handheld around. I'll turn it on in the morning and it still hasn't charged by the time I go to bed. The nice thing about having time division multiple access is that you can have 2 simultaneous voice conversations, or you can have 2 simultaneous data transmissions, or you can have 1 of each. When DMR first started, we thought it would be a good application to have voice on one time slot and APRS on the other time slot. It works, except it violates FCC regulation because DMR does not broadcast your unique call sign like regular APRS stations do. Each radio has a unique number, and we cannot put a call sign where that number field is because that's part of the standard. So we had to stop experimenting with it, but it is possible. And in the commercial business, This comes in handy for schools where they can track their school buses on one time slot and still talk on the other one. There are some schools around the country that do that. There are some taxi cab companies that use that type. So the person who dispatches taxis knows where each one is at using the GPS. There's a proposed rules change that's coming from the DMR Association to the FCC to where they will allow to use a unique number for APRS, so we can use it on our digital system as long as that unique number is registered somewhere or it can be looked up. But that's still pending with the FCC. Our system here in Nebraska, this is just a brief overview of it, is that we have a master repeater in Omaha. It's located in downtown Omaha. We have one located in downtown Lincoln. Each of these two are standalone master systems. They're tied into a bridge that goes out to the internet. Our bridge happens to be in Kansas City. From there it goes up to Illinois where it actually gets out to the internet. But as an example, people in Omaha can talk separate from the people in Lincoln without conflicting, using the specific time slots and talk group numbers. Or they can talk to each other, or they can talk around the world. Those are basically the options of it. Nice thing about DMR, you can send out messages. You can send them out to one individual, or you can send them out to a group, like this shows. Now, be aware that when you do that, anybody else can read them. Because in ham radio, there's no secrecy. So when you send out a message, it's open to the world to see if they have a DMR radio on that frequency.
Question, Dr. George.
Yes?
Is it illegal to encrypt a message? Yes.
That it is.
All right.
However, that encryption has to be in the public domain. If it is encrypted, it has to be in the public domain to where it's no longer secret.
Just like a very simple, like not even an encryption, like say a base 64 conversion of a.
You're not allowed to hide the.
You're not allowed to have age secrets in DMR or amateur radio. However, DMR operates on 16 encryption codes. They don't call them encryption codes, they call them color codes. Why, I don't know. That's part of the standard that started in Europe. And each repeater can have its own unique color code. My DMR repeater, it's on the MARC system, has a color code of 1. The one I have at my house that's on the DCI network has a color code of 2. Because they are fairly close together, and we didn't want to have one cause interference to the other. Plus, it's convenient. I have repeater 1 and I have repeater 2. But all that information is in the public domain. So, and there's places on the web you can go look it up to program your radios so you can hear the conversations. Obviously, analog radios won't hear it. D-Star won't hear it. System Fusion won't hear it. Did I answer your question? Maybe?
So the color code's like a PL tone, though.
Basically, if you want to think of it as a PL tone, you can, but there are no PL tones in DMR.
Right.
It's just a way of making it unique.
But if you're using a color code on a repeater and you have the wrong color code set into your radio,
You're not
you
gonna
won't
get
be
into
able
the
to
repeater.
open the repeater up.
Yes, you're correct in that analogy, but technically they're two distinctly different things. But they basically, in some senses, do the same. perform the same function. Okay, I got a couple slides here from Motorola that show their digital, handheld, and mobile radios. I've got both of these. I have one of these here with me tonight if you want to see it. It's a monochrome. Now in DMR, these are unique bands, no dual band radios. They're all single band radios, UHF or VHF. The DMR standard in the United States is to use UHF, except in those areas where it conflicts with the Navy radar systems. They have VHF radios. So along the East Coast of places and on the West Coast in various places, they have VHF radios, DMR. Handheld, mobile, basically one is a complement of the other, the same level of technology in both of them. It wasn't meant to be talked across states or among states or across the state. That's why we have statewide Nebraska talk group. Each local is local to each unique master on the network. If you want to talk to Chicago, there's a Midwest talk group.
What states are in the Midwest? I'm looking it up. I always
Okay,
wondered.
there are 8 states. Nebraska, North and South Dakota, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio.
Oh, I can get into Ohio with that.
Yes, you can.
Isn't Kansas on there? Did you say
No.
Kansas?
No. Kansas was at one time. Then they moved to the Texas-Oklahoma region. Some people didn't like that, so they may have by now switched back to the Midwest. I don't know. They may be on Midwest now, I don't know, but they switched to Texas, Oklahoma at one time. Politics, folks. That's what it was. Yes, sir.
Okay, on your setup in your truck, when you're in Lincoln at the Hamfest with your mobile radio, can you get into your repeater that 50 miles with your radio from the
Yes,
truck?
yes,
That's pretty good distance for a mobile.
yes it is. I have done it. But why risk that when I can talk through the Lincoln repeater?
I was just wondering, you know, it's got a pretty good distance, and I was just wondering if you knew it that far, yeah.
One time I keyed it up on my hand, 4 watts of power. It was marginal, but I did key it up. Yes, sir.
The Tesla repeater comes with a Fusion repeater here recently. Sounds like there's quite a few similarities between Fusion and the DMR. Any thoughts on your part of if there's major differences or between the two systems? They're obviously not compatible to each other.
Well, they have different, the System Fusion and D-Star are FDMA. That's Frequency Division Time Access. DMR is is TDMA, Time Division Multiple Access, which allows the 2 simultaneous conversations on 2 different time slots.
Yeah, because.
System Fusion does not do that.
Okay, I see the difference there.
Neither does
We've
D-Star.
had so far pretty good success with the Fusion repeater. The people that use
Well,
it has good range, but like. you say-
Yaesu adopted the Apple marketing technology of the early 80s when they came out with the Apple computers in schools. They gave them to schools, hoping the kids would go home and ask mom and dad to buy one for home. That's what System Fusion did. They sold them to various clubs for $500, hoping club members would go out and buy their radios at the regular price. But why? Because with System Fusion, you have both analog and digital input to the repeater. Why go out and pay $500–600 for another handheld radio when you can use the one you have now to get into it?
Like I said, I had some difficulties with my radio, but I did get them resolved, so.
I have not listened to System Fusion. Yes, sir.
I think one of the primary differences, especially for folks that would be fairly new into the hobby, is that that's somewhat complex. I mean, you talk code plugs and being able to look at the radio and know what the heck's going on, and where the system fusion, it's a button, it's digital or not, you know?
Yeah.
So,
With System Fusion, you have a button you can change between digital and analog.
Right.
But yes, it is a little bit complex, and it took me a while to understand it. But once I tripped my trigger, I knew what was happening. And the thing about it is, it's pretty much standard somewhat across the country on the DMR MARC network. The DCI network has its own standard, but yet they can interface with each other.
It took me less time to figure out how to program my MD380 using the software that came with it than it did for me to get the software loaded to program a bow thing.
I got my radio for Christmas and I got my number that same day.
I got my number in 7 minutes.
Yeah, that's about how long it
Yeah.
took. Yeah.
Anybody know
You got
Doug
your number
Halbert?
Yeah.
He's the one who assigns those. I shouldn't say he doesn't assign them personally. It's entered into a computer system he has access to. It goes down through and picks the next available number available for that state. So right now, in the state of Nebraska, I think we have close to 120 registered users. If ID number 006 is open, it'll go back to the stop on 006 and assign it to you, rather than having to go 125 or whatever the next number is.
George?
Yes?
Go over the ability of the radio to use simplex rather than just going through a repeater. Can they talk radio to radio?
They can.
Thank you.
There are a series of nationwide, there are a series of simplex frequencies that are recognized nationwide for DMR. Not only that, but you can use most of you heard the word code plug a few minutes ago. That's a program you work on in the computer, then you load it to the radio. That's called the code plug. It goes back to Motorola standards. But you can use a talk around feature using the repeater frequency, repeater output frequency to talk from one radio to the other. You're basically talking around the repeater in simplex mode. When you key up in talk around mode, you're keying up on the repeater output frequency. And that applies to just about all of these radios. Now, I got handouts up here on the table. I have samples, not sample, they're actually working handheld radios. They're not samples, and they're not door prizes. They're my door prizes. If you want to see them, feel free to come up, take a handout, look at the radios, ask questions.